Hi, I'm Rabbi Orlofsky, and this is the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And we'd like to welcome you to this week's podcast, whether you're watching on Torah Anytime or wherever you watch or listen to podcasts. And there are people who listen to the podcast. My producer just told me that our numbers on the sites where people only listen to it have been going up. I guess I'm not quite as photogenic as I thought I was, but there are people who actually do stuff and they just listen to the podcasts. And those numbers are going up. And I had a visit from a young man this past week. And he didn't ask me to give him a shout out. He asked me to give a shout out to another friend of his, but I forgot the name, and I told him to send me an email with the name, and he didn't send it yet. But he learns in a yeshiva in Lakewood, and he says that he downloads the podcast and then distributes it to everybody in his school, and from there they distribute it to the other schools in Lakewood. So there are hundreds of people listening that I have no way of knowing about. And I'm sure this is happening and being recreated in cities all across the world. And there are probably at this point, 3 or 4 million people listening. I have no way of knowing. But our numbers keep growing. The interest keeps growing, and we are so excited that you can be a part of our program. And the podcast this week is being sponsored Le'ilei Nishmas Inga Borg Bas David Shlomo. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Whose yortzeit is Chaf Beis Iyar, the 22nd of Iyar, and that's her 31st yortzeit. And what her daughter wrote is that she escaped from Berlin in February 1939. Mamish got out just at the last opportunity before the gates closed. And she says she brought us up with a strong sense of Jewish identity. And she says, I think she would have enjoyed your podcasts. And she should have an Aliyas Neshama, absolutely. And I'm sure that the podcast is, of course, being broadcast in the highest levels of Shemayim. So I'm sure she's listening in. So, Mom, it should just continue to be an Aliyah for you and for your children and grandchildren, and they should all go mechayil and wonderful, wonderful things. Okay. I realize we only have 2 podcasts till Shavuos. We have this one that's coming out, and we have the one that'll come out the week of Shavuos, and then the next one is going to be Motzei Shavuos, which for those of you in Chutz La'aretz is you have a 3-day yontif coming up. So glad I live here. But the truth is, I actually had quite a number of offers for Shavuos in various communities around the country, around the world this year. But, the idea of a 3-day yontif and giving shiurim for a long time. Somebody gave me a piece of advice once, which I found to be interesting. They said the best place to be for Tisha B'Av, if you have to go to a community for Tisha B'Av, is definitely South Africa. Because since the world is upside down, and for them it's like the winter, so the tinus goes out like 6 o'clock. Not so late as it is in other places of the world. And the worst place to be would be Manchester / Gateshead / Scotland, any place that's very, very far north, because it goes out very late. Conversely, the best place to be for Shavuos, if you're being hired as a speaker, is Gateshead, Scotland, Manchester, because they first daven Ma'ariv about 11, and they start getting ready for davening about 3, so it's a little more condensed. The worst place to be for Shavuos, if you're a speaker, is where I went, which was Johannesburg, South Africa, where we davened Ma'ariv at 6 p.m., and we started Shachris at 8 a.m. That's a very long night for someone to speak. Now, I know what you're thinking. Rabbi Orlofsky, the problem with you is to get you to stop speaking, and yet you'd be surprised that even I have my moments where I'm starting to be taxed for my ability to speak. So that's where I was. But a 3-day yontif, that's really quite challenging, especially if you're going to speak on Shabbos and Shavous and second day Shavous. It's a lot. Yeah. So I'll be here in Eretz Yisrael. Something that might appear coincidental, but of course nothing is coincidental in Judaism, and that is the 6-Day War took place just before Shavuos, and it took them a while to clean away the garbage and the rubble that the Palestinians had thrown on the access to the old city. It's something that you don't really appreciate. You go there now. My brother Gedalia, I'm one of 6 boys, and except for my first brother and my last brother, everyone had a choice what they wanted to do for their bar mitzvah. My first brother, my father said he's going to make a big bar mitzvah like he always wanted to make. That was my brother Jason over Shalom. My father spelled out his name, Jason, in 2,000 roses. It was a very, very, very beautiful affair. Yeah, totally lost on a 13-year-old boy, but it didn't matter. It was his first bar mitzvah, and he was gonna make it up big. My last brother, my brother Bruce, West Hempstead, he was told that you don't have a choice either. My father always wanted to make a bar mitzvah in Israel, and his bar mitzvah was going to be in Israel. And in fact, we went to Heichel Shlomo. There was no great synagogue at the time. And that's where he laned, and that's where he davened, and he had his bo bayom at the Kaisel, in the Western Wall, and it was beautiful, beautiful. I have a story I have to tell. This is an Orlofsky story. It's not one that we should learn from, but it's a lot of fun. It's like a lot of things that I do in this podcast. It's not something you should learn from, but it's a lot of fun. My mother had a very loud, and most people said infectious laugh. She would go to, people loved to have her in audience because she would start to laugh and everybody would laugh. She had a very loud, infectious laugh. Anyway, they were flying across. Everybody was flying across for the bar mitzvah, and she and her sister were sitting next to each other. They were talking, and they were laughing. And the people in front of them kept saying, "Could you be quiet? Yeah, stop laughing." And of course, that just made my mother laugh harder, And anyway, it was a long flight with this kind of attention, yeah. And fine. So afterwards, this was 1975, we took all of our people on Tiyulim, and we were some Tiyul in the West Bank, Yehuda v'Shomron, yeah. And we passed this minibus that broke down. And the guide says, listen, it's probably not safe for them after dark. Back then, it was no problem before it got dark, but after dark, it might not be safe. Maybe we could give them a ride. And my parents were like, of course, And who is it? The people who sat in front of my mother. They get on the bus, and they see each other. And they're so nervous, and they all sit down. And my mother calls me over because I brought a bunch of boys from yeshiva along on this particular trip. And she says, tell everybody to sing as loud as they can. And we're singing. And the people are clapping. They're having a wonderful time. Evidently, their position on noise changed. But he the first one came, the last one came. After that, everybody had a choice of what they wanted to do. So my brother Gedalia, he said he wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael. Now, this was 1966, I think. So it was so interesting. The things that we take for granted. He says, we couldn't go to the old city. We couldn't go to the Kaisel. You went on the roof of Heichel Shlomo, which was, at the time, the tallest building in Yerushalayim. And they hadn't built the plaza yet. Of course, they hadn't built what was the Hilton. Now I think it's the Crown Plaza, whatever it is. But the fanciest hotel in Yerushalayim was the King's Hotel at the time. The King David, yeah. But that was in a class of its own. From Jews, didn't go there. But you went on the roof of Heichel Shlomo. and you look to the old city, and you look to see the Kaisel. That was the access you had. I remember he told me, he says, there was a whole no man's land with barbed wire. He says, so I stuck my hand through the barbed wire. My hand was at least in the part that Jews couldn't go to. So I reached across. Yeah. And they said to me afterwards, I realized they could have probably shot it off. Baruch Hashem, they didn't. Yeah. And the way he describes, in 1966, the experience in Yerushalayim was a completely different one. Completely different. It took years till Yerushalayim took on some kind of a status, I think. When I came to learn Yeshiva the first time, which was in the 70s, there was one traffic light in all of Yerushalayim. It was on the corner of Yafo and King George, and it turned to a blinker 8 o'clock at night. This was a real kind of backwater thing. So the war was fought, and they opened up the old city, Kaisel, the devastation and destruction that they saw. So my parents came that January, 6 months later. And they were saying, still then, to get to the Kaisel, you were walking over rubble. It was a disaster. Disaster. They said they went to Ammunition Hill, and you could still see the blood on the ground. The battles that were fought there, to capture Yerushalayim was a dramatic thing. So in 1967, after the war, it was Shavous, and they were opening up the Kaisel for the first time to people on the morning of Shavous. Everybody who had learned during Shavuz could. Now, this is one of the things, if you've ever been in Yerushalayim for Shavuz, this is one of the things that people do. They walk to the Kaisel to be able to daven Shavuz morning. A friend of mine once described it as the most inspirational walk and the worst davening you'll ever have. Because when you start walking, it's late at night. It's slowly getting towards morning, but it's still dark out, and there's often even a little bit of a chill in the air. And you're walking from wherever your community is, and the closer you get, Jews are coming from every direction. Every artery is feeding into it until finally you're coming to the road it's packed with Yidden coming. And you come to the Kaisel Plaza, all the way back. All the way back, it's full. Yeah, amazing thing. When you go there and it's not so full, you appreciate when you go there and it's full, it's unbelievable. Lahavdil, it was a bunch of years ago, we had a very heavy rainfall. And Baruch Hashem, this year we had in Eretz Yisrael 150% rainfall. So we had half time what we usually get. And the Kinneret, which is still filling up from the melting snows on the Hermon and the little streams that are feeding into it. So it's above the lower red line, and it's almost up to, it's shooting towards the higher red line. I remember when it was full. We went to the Kinar for Pesach with Or Sameach. And if you've ever been to the Kinar, where they have the beach outside there, the separate beach by the Kinneret, so you there's a little area, like dressing area, etc. Then you walk across gravel. There's a little path. And after the path, for most years, you have to keep walking along the gravel till you come to the water. Here, all of that was filled with water to the point that the steps leading up to the little area where you change, my son was little at the time. I put him there, and the waves were lapping on him. It was completely full. So lahavdil, you know what it is. You have a little room to maneuver. I mean, we went there Chol Hamoed. It was pretty packed, but there was still room to be able to move. Shavuos, forget about it. It's packed, packed. And everybody goes there, and everybody's davening, and then you hit Nates, and the whole place goes silent, and the sun begins to rise, and then the sun continues to rise, and then the sun begins to beat down upon you. And you suddenly realize, I don't know which minyan I'm actually in. I'm trying to say hello. They're leaning Rus. This is going on over here. Everything's going on. And by the time it's over, it suddenly hits you. You had that nervous excitement as you were walking, and now you have that exhaustion. And you begin to walk back in one of the least inspiring walks that you will ever have. And people are passing out on the sidewalks, and heat frustration, It's a lot less. But okay, I understand. It's the word they use in Hebrew is chavaya. Chavaya. I know this from a girl who's going to seminary, and the girls pass down notebooks to each other with chavayot. And a guy said to me once, a girl comes to Israel, she wants to have a chavaya, an experience. There's this blind couple that has guests. We want to go there. Do you know anybody who lives in Tzfat? We want to go to Tzfat for Shabbos. We want to do this. You have an experience. Guys like to find a place where they're a good cook and they basically move in. You can't get rid of them. So they're not looking for so much excitement. They have enough excitement. What could be more exciting than sitting in a beis medrash for 12 hours a day, steiging on a tosfos? That kind of level of excitement doesn't get any better than that. But so walking to the guys of chavaya, it's like one of those things that you have to do. Yeah. I never went to the Kotel on Shavous. And I'll tell you why. Now, I said at the beginning, we take things for granted. That's for sure true. That's for sure true. I lived most of my life, it's not true anymore, but I lived many years of my life in the greater New York area. I never went to the Empire State Building, never went to the Statue of Liberty. I never did any of those touristy New Yorker type of things because I lived there. I got involved in NCSY and started having to make trips and things. That was the only time I ever got to see any of this stuff. Who does those things? People who live there don't really do those things. It's for people who are coming to visit and have a chavaya. So I know people come to Eretz, they just want to dive into Kotel. Every day they go and they daven. It's a beautiful thing. Now, if you haven't been to the Kotel in 30 days, so I say you go to America and you come 30 days since you've been in Israel, you go to Yerushalayim, so you have to take Kriya. There are ways around it. If you want, you can sell your clothes to somebody. You can. There's a minig that's brought down in the Minchas Yerushalayim Siddur. It's, as far as I know, the only makor for it, but that's one of the great things about this podcast. If anybody knows anything, I'm sure I'm going to get an email on it. So, ad kadei kach that this past week, somebody sent me the lyrics to Yerushalayim, by Mordechai Ben David, in Hebrew and in English. So they said, here, you can read it in English. So I have such wonderful listeners. So there could be there's another one. But the only makor I've been able to find for this is the Minchas Yerushalayim Siddur. That was that Siddur, I don't even know if they still make it, but it was about this big. Had a map of the Erev in it of Yerushalayim. It had everything you could possibly imagine was in that Siddur. The binding broke instantly because it was so cheaply bound. But I don't know if they still have those pockets Siddurim like they did when I was a kid. When I was a kid, every kid got a little pocket about this big. And you kept it in your tefillin bag, or in your little plastic with your tefillin bag, not in the tefillin bag, yeah. And I think this is the main reason that so many people have an aversion to Tachnan, because it's not like an art scroll where they have one type of print and it just keeps going forever and ever and ever. Every now and then they take the black writing and put it on dark gray writing for special occasions so you can't see it, which is it's also fun. But basically it's the same print. These Sidurim, the print gets smaller and larger, I guess, to be able to create a contrast, make it easy for you. Except when it comes to the long Tachnan, it just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it's like microscopic. And you're like saying Tachnan, and it's getting smaller, but disappearing before your eye. I think that's the reason that to this day, When a chassan gets married, nobody's happy that he got married. They're happy they don't have to say tachman. Yeah. So it's very exciting. Pesach Kron tells the story. He's a male. So when he goes to shul, so almost every day he's got a bris, and they don't have to say tachman. And he says, one day he's in shul, and someone says to him, he says, "Oh, you have a bris today?" He says, "No, I'm flying out, so I'm not doing a bris." He says, "Then what good are you?" And he got so insulted. "What? I don't serve any purpose. I don't this." I said, "You're missing the point. Every one of us serves a purpose in this world. Whether you're a Rosh Hashiva, whether you're a Rav, whether you're a Mashbiya, whether you're a Gevir, whether you give millions of dollars to tzedakah, and all of that pales if you can get people to stop saying tachman. That is probably the most important role that any Jew can serve in this entire world. That's the only thing. Nobody cares you had a baby. They don't have to say tachman." And I wondered, what's the big deal? How long does it take? And then I realized everyone was traumatized in my generation from the shrinking letters in the little tachman. Anyway, I'm still a little bit off the page, as you can see this week. We're slowly pulling it back together. But so the Minchas Yerushalayim, it says if you go Erev Shabbos after Chatzos, you don't have to rice kriya. You don't have to tear your begeds. So there are different ways. The shaila comes up. What if you're in Yerushalayim and you don't go to the Kaisel? So there's dinim that when you come to the Churban of Yehuda, you tear kriya. When you come to Yerushalayim, you tear kriya. When you come to the Kaisel, you tear kriya. We're noig when you come to the Kaisel that you tear kriya. So what if you were in Yerushalayim for 30 days and you didn't go to the Kaisel? So someone asked for Chaim Shmulevitz, if you're in Yerushalayim for 30 days and you don't go to the Kaisel, what should you do? And he said, check your yichus. It's a little harsh. A yid is in Yerushalayim 3 days, doesn't go. Somebody told me he asked this question once to Sternbach. And he says, what if you're in Yerushalayim for 30 days and you don't go to the Kaisel? And he goes, what? He shrugs, he goes, well, I guess not everybody feels it. But Moshe Shapiro used to go every morning to daven at the Kaisel, daven Vasikin. And but you see how Reb Chaim Shmulevitz looking at the Kaisel? So he says like this, 1967, sure it's 1967, that morning they were going to open up the Kaisel for the first time. 19 years. You couldn't go daven by the Kaisel. The best you could do is go on top of Heichel Shlomo and look at it from a distance. I still remember when I was here, I think it was 1975, the one bus used to go through the old city. And there were these two tunnels. And the bus is, zooming towards you. You had this gigantic rambling hulk. And you had to press yourself into one of the little doorways over there, or you get flattened and just boom, just go right through. It was so much easier. But back then, climbing over rubble, and now it's the first time you can go. 19 years. So Chaim Shmulevitz spoke in the mirror, and he spoke about the importance of the Kaisel. I mean, you see how important he felt it was to go daven at the Kaisel. And he says, there's no question that is the second best place for you to daven. The best place to daven is where you were learning all night. So there's something profound about that, because everything has to go into a context. You have to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. There's a natural pull. There's a power to the Kaisel. And when you, I know somebody, this is the story he told me. Rabbi Alan Siegel, he was in the old city for Yom Kippur. He was in a yeshiva in the old city, and he was there. And after they finished the davening, so everybody's davening yeshiva. All the frum people are davening in the yeshivas, they're davening in their shuls. They're not really davening with the Kaisel. So afterwards, he says, I went down to the Kotel to see. Listen to the story. I find it amazing. He says, it was filled with secular people. They weren't davening. They were just there. It's Yom Kippur. There's this connection. There's this tug that they were feeling. That's why people like Meir Schuster used to go down dafka to the Kotel to try to get people, because they go there and they pick up that experience. They feel something they may not be able to put into words. That there's an intensity of Kedusha that's taking place there. I was doing a question and answer once, and this woman asked me, she says, I saw a secular Jew, and he had a necklace with Yud K Vav K on it. The ineffable name of God, the tetragram. If these things have more meaning to you. I never really quite understood this, because people translate tefillin as phylacteries. And you see them, they say tefillin and they translate in English phylacteries. Is there really anybody who knows what phylacteries are and don't know what tefillin is? I was speaking for Rashi Simon and Rabbi Dayan, Rashi Simon in London. And he says, next Saturday night we begin the penitential prayers. And I said, do you think there's anyone who knows what penitential prayers are and don't know what slichos are? Just say slichos. Yeah. No, it's one of those things that get a little difficult to translate. Yeah, but there's this draw that you feel like when you go to the Kotel, where you feel this connection. I'm going there and I'm feeling something that I may not be able to put into words. And so people have this universal connection, whether we realize it or not. There's something inside of them. There's something that touches us. We just have to be open to it. We just have to be open to it. We have to allow it to be able to touch us. And that level of Kedusha, there's a concentration. So this woman says to me, I see this guy, he's wearing a Yud K Vav K, which, by the way, is not a kosher symbol, the Yud K Vav K. Somebody said to me they used to put it on mun, but I don't know about that. Anyway, so the Yud K Vav K, the 4-letter name of God, and he has a necklace with that. So she says, you can't go into the bathroom wearing that. So he laughs at her. She says, why, God's not in the bathroom? She says, I didn't know what to answer. So I said, and God is in the synagogue? The answer is that the word olam, world, is related to the word he'elam, hidden. And the world is not evenly distributed. There are places where God is more revealed and less revealed. And in a makam tumah, although God can go down there, he holds himself back. He'll go in if he needs to. But he makes his presence less seen there. And therefore, we have to have a sensitivity to place. Parshas Bahar, which is either this week or next week, depending on where you are, there's a distinction made between houses that are in unwalled cities and houses that are in walled cities. The distinction is that a house that's in an unwalled city returns to their owner in Yovel, just like their field, says the Ramban, because if there's a house and it's not in a walled city, so mistame, it's associated with the field, and that's where you live when you're working in the field, and so you need it. Just like you need your field in order to earn a living, you need that house. But why'd you buy a house in a walled city? It's residential. So what? You have an emotional attachment? Okay, so you have a limited amount of time to redeem it, and then buy another house. You'll have an emotional attachment to that. Yeah. When I grew up in a house out on Long Island, so recently some of my kids were in America. I drove them past my old house. This is where I grew up. Then my parents moved to West Hempstead. They were in that house for over 20 years. And there was an emotional attachment to it. And then we sold it when my mother passed away. So then you move on to another house. People get an emotional attachment, they move on. But that's not what you're getting your land back for. You're getting your land back for because I needed to be able to make a living, not because I have an emotional attachment to it. Yeah. There are certain places, that have more of an intensity. So the Sfas Emes says, but it's more than that, because a city that had a wall around it when it came into Eretz Yisrael, it has an inherent Kedusha. For example, you read Megillah on Tes Vav in cities that had a wall around it from the time of Yoshua when we came in and captured it. Or a city with a wall around it from the time of Yoshua, it has a higher level of Kedusha, of holiness. You send out a Metzorah. You send, certain dinim apply to it if it's a city with a wall around it. So it says the Sfas Emes, because the Kedusha is not distributed evenly. And the Knaanim, who understood spirituality because they worked hard to cancel it out, whenever they found the concentration of Kedusha, of holiness, of spirituality, they built a wall around it to lock it in, so that it shouldn't chas v'shalom spread. And they use that to concentrate all the tumah in, to try to counteract it. So when we came in, we saw the walls around the cities, we knew where we were. The remains of Eli Cohen, finally being returned to the Jewish people. He was a spy. He made his way up in the Syrian military. And one of the things he did is, he said, in the Golan Heights, they had these built-in bunkers, and he says that they become boiling hot, these cement things out in the sun. He says, plant these trees around them so that you'll be able to give shade to the soldiers. And he passed this information on to the Israelis. So in the 1967 war, when we went up into the Golan Heights, they just looked forever there were these trees, and that's where they threw their grenades to be able to knock the people out. They were able to identify them right away. When we came into Eretz Yisrael, any place we saw the Canaan built a wall, we knew this was a place that had concentration of Kedusha, of holiness. So the Mishnah in Kalim tells us there are 10 levels of Kedusha. Number 1 is the land of Israel. Number 2, a walled city is from the time of Yoshua. The third one is Yerushalayim. The fourth one is the Har HaBayis, the Temple Mount. And within the Temple Mount, it goes more and more intense till it reaches the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's a concentration of Kedusha. So when we understand that there's a concentration of Kedusha in place, there's concentrations of Kedusha in time. And the Sfiras HaOmer, the 7 weeks that we're spending, are building ourselves up to that day of Shavuos, which is the 50th day. 50 is like that Yovel, which is outside of time and space. And this is going to take us someplace outside of time and space to be able to get the Torah, to be able to appreciate it in a way. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, says the Ramban. Why is the building of the Mishkan in the end of Sefer Shmos? Because the purpose of going out of Egypt was to get the Torah, and the purpose of the Mishkan was to be a traveling Har Sinai. And that's why the Sanhedrin sets themselves up on the Har HaBayis, the Temple Mount by the Beis HaMikdash. The relationship of the Torah of Har Sinai and the Har HaBayis, and the closest we can get to it today, the Kaisel, the Western Wall. So that's the concentration in space. Just as Shavuos is that conclusion and concentration in time of the buildup of the 7 weeks. So, Mitzvah Hashem, we should conclude our preparation, and we should be able to go into Shavuos with the proper mindset. And those of us who are here, we should make an effort, certainly, to have that same appreciation for the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, and take that opportunity to be able to feel that power at the Kaisel. That's it for this week. If you'd like more information on this show in general, go to RabbiOrlofsky.com/podcast. If you'd like to make a comment on this particular show, go to RabbiOrlofsky.com/podcast/37. You want to find out about upcoming events, RabbiOrlofsky.com/events. As I mentioned, I'm going to be in America the last 2 weeks of June. If you'd like to contact me, go to RabbiOrlofsky.com/contact. And if you'd like to sponsor a podcast, go to RabbiOrlofsky.com/podcast. Click on the sponsor an episode button. I'm David Orlofsky. This is the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.